Zach, we got this week. Did you see what I tweeted out about Bud Elliott?
Oh, I did. And he clapped back at you.
Yeah, and I clapped right back as well because I was like, dude, this makes no sense. Like, all right, so if you missed it, Bud Elliott over on the Cover 3 podcast. I actually really like Bud Elliott, and Bud Elliott and I have exchanged a few messages, and so I've talked to him, and I really like Bud Elliott, but I just thought it was a completely asinine take from him to say that a 3-loss Ole Miss team would get in over an 11-1 Indiana team. And his entire point was is that Indiana's probably only going to play like 3 bowl teams this season, which I get. Indiana does not have a tough schedule. I get that. But like I would get it if this Ole Miss team was facing Georgia, Alabama, you know, LSU, whatever. Like I mean, they are facing LSU, but I'm talking about like top 3 in the SEC, LSU, or something like that. I would get it if they're facing like all 3 of the top 3 teams. Tennessee, let's say that. I would get it if they're facing all 3 teams. They face Georgia. That's it. And Georgia just lost to Bama, and Georgia looks like their defense is crap. Like I know that Alabama offense is really good, but like you can't have the tackling performance that you did against Alabama and claim that you have a great defense. You just can't. I know Alabama has really shifty players, but still, like you have got to you have got to be able to tackle. And on top of that, like it just and I clap back with him at this with like, you do realize if the SEC played 9 conference games, Ole Miss would only have 4 teams on their schedule that are bowl teams. So, like, if we're going to look at it that way, let's also make it the same way the other way. One of the reasons why the SEC gets so many bowl teams is because of their scheduling, where they only play 8 conference teams, and the half of their teams play an FCS team in November, and the other, which is Ole Miss, is one of them. Not this year. They play 4 non-conference games right at the beginning of their schedule, and then, which look what happens when they finally played a conference game. And then to Kentucky, of all teams, Kentucky, which everybody is raving about now, is like a great team because they played a close game to Georgia. They're not. Kentucky is not good. But of course, they're in the SEC, so everybody's going to say that they're good. And anyway, I could go on and on and on. Zach, do you have any thoughts on it?
The SEC, like, sunshine pumpers just annoy the crap out of me.
Which I'll give Bud Elliott credit. He is not normally an SEC sunshine
and he's
pumper.
not.
He does talk a lot of recruiting, so he can at times, but he is not normally one of those people. He's not a Paul Feinbaum or a Gary Danielson or some of those guys.
Which it frustrates me, especially when then the guys who aren't normally that start to get on this thing where it's, 11-1 Indiana shouldn't be in the playoff over 9-3. It's like, with what wins? Like, that's my question. Like, if Ole Miss goes 9-3, presuming they lose to LSU and Georgia, their best win would be against an Oklahoma who has no offense whatsoever. Like, what are we doing?
Yep.
Like, it's asinine. It's the only team in the SEC that could go 9-3 and make the playoff is Georgia, because their schedule is absurd. And I still don't know if they should get in.
Well,
because
Florida. But they're not going 9-3.
I was gonna say no, Florida. Yeah, I was gonna say.
I'm just saying, if they did, they could make it.
I had to stop for a minute because I'm like, are you suggesting that Florida? No, you're not suggesting that.
No, I'm just saying if they were 9-3, they would be.
Yeah. Oh man.
But here, I got the schedule right here. Look at this schedule. I mean, look at these first 4 games. You're gonna tell me that Indiana, like you're gonna comment on them and talk about how terrible of a schedule they have when Ole Miss plays Furman, which, like, the SEC is the only conference in the world where they get credit for beating an FCS team by 70, because recruiting and everything. Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest. Oh, congrats. You went to Wake Forest. What has Wake Forest done this year? Nothing. They're a bad football team. Yeah. And then Georgia Southern. Congrats. You beat 4 bad teams. I mean, Wake Forest is essentially a G5 team at this point.
Yeah. Middle Tennessee has lost by 28 to Western Kentucky, lost by 28 to Duke, and they hosted Duke, and they still lost by 28, and they lost by 17 to Memphis. Get that schedule out of here.
Yeah. I'll tell you right now, the 4 teams that would be bowl eligible if the SEC had to play a 9-conference schedule would be Georgia, Oklahoma maybe. I don't even know if Oklahoma would be for sure. I know that they're ranked right now. That's not a good football team. Jackson Arnold is not a good quarterback, and they have an okay defense. They're not going to survive the SEC. They might not even make a bowl game this year. And then LSU, another overrated team. I mean, this is a completely overrated team that's not very good, but somehow they're 13th in the polls. And then South Carolina, UK, one of those teams aren't making a bowl team if you play a 9-game conference schedule. It's just asinine. It's completely ridiculous.
It's insane.
Yeah.
But man, well, you know who else? And Wake Forest, their one other Power 4 team, they lost to Virginia. Virginia stinks. They lost to Louisiana, not Louisiana State, Louisiana.
Yeah.
What are we doing? It says on Yahoo they're 17th in the ACC. I know that's not exactly accurate because they've only played a couple of conference games, but still,
Yeah.
Ole Miss,
it's just ridiculous.
Ole Miss is a fraud. That's what they are. Just like Missouri is a fraud. Just like Oklahoma is a fraud. Just like LSU is a fraud. I don't mean frauds as in like maybe some of these teams finish in the top 25. They're not playoff teams.
Yeah. Which, like, in that situation, you're saying that Ole Miss plays 3 ranked teams on their schedule because none of those other teams are getting ranked. Florida's not getting ranked. Kentucky's not getting ranked. Kentucky's going to lose here soon. They might jump into the rankings for a minute or two, but I mean, they just lost to Kentucky, so it doesn't really matter. Like, if they're 9-3, they've lost all of their ranked games. And if Indiana is 11-1, they've beaten either Ohio State or Michigan.
Yeah.
And they've beat Nebraska, who was a ranked team at one point. But, because the SEC beats their teams ranked when they're ranked and not after, because they play an 8-game conference schedule. Anyway, Darren Talks Ball is here as well. Darren, we appreciate you being here. He says, ever wonder what Notre Dame would look like if they joined a conference? Ole Miss. That's a good point.
Shots fired. Shots fired. Can I have a question?
Yes.
Do you think Indiana beats Kentucky?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I do too. So, like, why are we even talking about this? They can beat a team that Ole Miss didn't.
Honestly, Minnesota would beat Kentucky. Like, there's a lot of Big Ten teams that would beat Kentucky.
That's a spicy take.
You go to Minnesota, like, Minnesota would win that game. There's
a
lot of Big Ten teams that would beat Kentucky.
Yeah, their quarterback issue is a problem.
Yeah.
I mean,
Rutgers said bye-bye Gavin Wimsatt, and Kentucky was like, hey, yeah, come over here. We'll make you a focal point of our offense. Okay. Anyway, I'm not trying to bash Gavin Wimsatt. I actually like Gavin Wimsatt, but anyway.
We're bashing the SEC. That's what we're doing.